Texas Pete is taking its flavor on the road with convenient, easy-to-enjoy portion control packets. Whether it's a Texas Pete dip cup or sauce packet, your customers will be able to enjoy bold flavor for a better on-the-go dining experience. Anywhere, anytime. Ask your broker for the #1 portion control hot sauce or visit TexasPeteFoodService.com for more information. Hi, and welcome to Extra Serving, a Nation's Restaurant News podcast. I'm your host, Holly Petre. Today we're going to be talking about earnings. A slew of restaurant companies have reported, and we are here to talk about them. From McDonald's to Starbucks to Cheesecake Factory to BJ's and more. Some through lines we've seen are traffic numbers are down. McDonald's the Bellwether showed a slight dip in traffic over the quarter, while standouts Starbucks, Wendy's, Chipotle, and Texas Roadhouse bucked the trends during the first part of earnings season. Many brands saw double-digit sales increases, including McDonald's and Taco Bell, while others like BJ's, Dine Brands, and Brinker are looking to boost sales and traffic. Wingstop is set to launch a new technology platform in the next quarter, putting the technologically savvy brand ahead of the curve. What are the bigger themes of this earnings season? Stay tuned to find out. Now let's turn it over to my lovely co-host.
Hey, I'm Leigh Zinsmeister, Managing Editor of Nation's Restaurant News.
Hi, I'm Joanna Fantozzi, Senior Editor with Nation's Restaurant News.
Welcome, another girls episode. We get these more often now. Sam's traveling all the time. We get to do these all the time.
Yeah, we got to keep him out of office more.
I think we said that last time too, so I think he's just listening to us.
It's working. Thanks, Sam.
No, we know he doesn't listen to this podcast. But we thank all you dear listeners for not being like our boss and actually listening. All right, so this has been a crazy week. I think it's safe to say that it's been pretty crazy. We have seen earnings out the butt. It's a lot. There's a lot of earnings.
Yeah, to put a definition on out the butt, yesterday and today's Thursday. Yesterday and today there were 16 earnings calls, or will be by the end of the day today, that we will have listened to or checked the numbers on and reported on just in 2 days. And it's been, a couple weeks of not quite this level, but a couple weeks of earnings reports already. So
yeah, and our colleague Alicia, I'm not going to point out who exactly it was, but our colleague Alicia asked one of the CEOs that reported this week why they're doing this to us, why they are all reporting their earnings in the exact same 2 days. And the answer was to keep you guys on your toes. Well, definitely point well made, because I think that throughout this whirlwind week, I think we learned a lot about what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, so that's a great segue, Joanna. What did you guys learn about? I mean, I covered a little bit in the intro that traffic was a huge through line throughout brands that had great traffic versus brands that were working on traffic. I think that's the big theme that I've really pulled out, but there are some other smaller threads that we're going to talk about. I know we're going to talk about them as we go through. So what do you guys think this is a baseline for the earnings season so far?
Yeah, so a lot of companies are reporting dips in traffic. Something that's interesting there, though, is that a lot of companies seem to be reporting that traffic is coming back already. So at the beginning of Q3, we saw some big dips in traffic, but Wendy specifically reported that it came back up at the end of Q3. I listened to the Shake Shack call today, and they're reporting that traffic was down in Q3, but up in October. So these earnings are always interesting, because if there's something negative to report, executives are always quick to tell you if they have since turned it around. So of course we'll have to wait another 3 months to see if the pattern holds for Q4, if there was something interesting about October. But yeah, traffic is something to keep an eye on. It's one of those, unpredictable macroeconomic question marks of like, are people still dining out? Are they trading down? McDonald seems to think so. And so it's just something interesting to keep an eye on. I don't know if that was a summertime blip or something more long-term that we might see coming.
Well, something Alicia talked about is that McDonald's has raised prices over 10%, which is a lot for McDonald's, which is known as a value player. And so that may be a part of why they're seeing these traffic dips. And they did say that they expect to see their chicken become $1 billion market. Like, that's crazy. And that is going to increase their traffic even more. But so Joanna, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, it was something that I find really interesting. The through line here, like you said, is traffic, but different brands are trying different strategies and have different takes on exactly what hello, that's the word is customers, what customers are doing. Because some people are raising prices. Some people say, no, don't raise prices. Customers are not spending as much right now. Some people are saying, some brands are saying, their traffic is up. Starbucks being one of those. Some brands are saying, traffic is faltering. There is definitely that. I know that Brinker had actually said that, again, they had that boost in October. If I had to guess, that Q4, October through December, is a lot easier for certain brands to get a boost in traffic, especially QSR, as you have the time of year a lot of people are going out to eat, and also all the fun LT holiday themed Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas and whatnot themed LTOs. But it is just so interesting to me how different brands have different takes on exactly what customer behavior is. I think we're honestly still trying, macroeconomics aside, I think we're still trying to figure out what the customer is doing now, 3.5 years after the pandemic. What are we doing right now?
Well, and Texas Roadhouse is a really interesting marker for this because Texas Roadhouse is casual dining, which is a brand or a group of restaurants that we've seen traffic dip for them, more than dip, I think, in some cases. But Texas Roadhouse has increased traffic. And so when we talk about trade down, it's interesting to think about Texas Roadhouse because they are typically what you would trade down from. And Chipotle, the same thing. You trade down from Chipotle to a McDonald's. And so both of those brands, I think, are really interesting. Alicia Kelso wrote a great article about what they have in common, which, you would never think of those two brands having anything in common. And her story was really great. And it was just saying that, like, these two brands, they aren't necessarily daily brands. So you don't feel the pricing that Chipotle's taken, which is 25%. You don't feel that, but you get to experience more of an occasion. Texas Roadhouse is an occasion. You go there, you have the peanuts. I've never been to one, but Alicia told me all about the peanuts, so now I know. I know about the peanuts now. And so she was just saying that these occasion restaurants are doing well because they have the it factor of, you don't want to lose something fun. You don't want to lose that when you trade down. You want to stay with the things that make you feel good, like hospitality at Texas Roadhouse that makes people feel great. Their bread and honey butter. See, I know so much about Texas Roadhouse now. Aren't you proud of me, Leah?
Yeah, I'd be prouder if you went to one.
There's nowhere near me. I want to go so bad. Texas Roadhouse, open up in New York City so I can come to you. I will be the first person in line. Trust me, I will be there. So that was an interesting through line that Alicia pointed out for those two. And when we look at traffic numbers, Starbucks makes total sense. And they're going to see even more traffic increases, I'm sure, as the holidays come up with their new drinks, which they just released on this week. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what traffic numbers do. But there are some interesting standouts so far.
Totally. And Texas Roadhouse is also, like, they're an experiential restaurant, like you said, but they're also heavily focused on off-premises right now. They are a brand that did it right during the pandemic and have just not let up on their focus there, which is working out for them because as their customers come back and say, hey, I want to go, like, we haven't been to Texas Roadhouse since 2019, like, let's get back in there. But they're still sending food out to customers at the same rate that they were before. But that's also, as Joanna said, another example of different brands taking different strategies, because while we've got Texas Roadhouse focused on off-premises, Shake Shack is really leaning into drive-thrus. They've hinted at some new prototypes coming out in the near future. But meanwhile, you've got McDonald's, which is saying, nope, we're going to put all of our time and investment into traditional restaurant formats. And that's where they're, placing all their bets. So it's another case of, different strategies for different restaurants, and there's no right or wrong way to do it.
Yeah, I think that there's also a pretty wide chasm between, in terms of different types of restaurants and their approach that they could take, between experiential restaurants like Texas Roadhouse and other casual dining concepts versus, I guess, more limited service. And with limited service restaurants, it's really a lot about the price. And the value that you're getting. And something that Papa John's really congratulated themselves on today during their earnings is that they were saying that they've been avoiding menu price increases. They're saying, hey, a lot of our colleagues are doing this. but we are not, because we want to be able to be the go-to for families to be able to place an order and get a full meal for family of 4 for $20, which they claim you can't do with drive-through type restaurants, which I'm not so sure about that. But the point being is that I think that there's really a big difference in those two types of strategies, and they could both work. And I think we'll see kind of in the long run which of these different types of strategies to go versus to stay, price increases versus price stagnation, experience versus not experience will win out.
I'm always curious to see, or I have been in this inflationary environment where inflation is cooling. Are these brands going to bring their prices down, or are they going to stay at this higher price point? I mean, we talked about Chipotle, there was a survey that came out last year that said that Chipotle was 10% cheaper than its competitors. So they had room to go on pricing. So really it's only 15% higher, but everybody else has raised prices. So Chipotle in theory still has room to take price, but it doesn't. I just feel like consumers must be getting tired of this. But is it a case of once you ring the bell, you can't unring it? Like, I don't really know what the right answer is on that. But I'm curious to know if this is if people are gonna have more promos. We saw Chipotle do its National Burrito, which was kind of a disaster, as it has been in years past. So I wonder if we're gonna see more promotions. But we talked about that during the last recession, that there was a lot of promotions, but it didn't really help. And no one really wants, it seems like no one wants to do promotions anymore. It seems like they're more trouble than it's worth. The National Cheeseburger Day, or month, whatever it was, saw McDonald's and Wendy's apps completely die. So I think that promotions are tricky, especially because you're using technology. But I think they're tricky because they don't want to be known as a player who always is giving out deals. So I guess I'm kind of mixed on what I think about the pricing versus deals. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think that that's something we've been talking about for a long time now, months. I want to say, I don't remember when the last time I wrote about that. The promotions versus deals, and or not taking any promotions and just focusing on everyday value. I wrote a story on that. I want to say it was like 6 or 8 months ago. And so we've been thinking about that for a long time, and it's a strategy that, again, this kind of like this chasm between these two different types of strategies. That's another one that we could put on there, is promotions versus everyday value, and that's something that Papa John's also talked about. They were talking about how their biggest competitor, i.e. Domino's, so they didn't say it by name, is all about promotions lately. They've been doing the 50% off thing. And they've just been really promotion heavy. And Papa John's is saying, well, we want to just be more about the everyday value. And then people can spend more on the more expensive pizzas and whatnot if they want. And so these are obviously two very different strategies. And I think it just really depends on your customer base, which one works.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. One is that I think some brands are starting to lean more into different kinds of marketing promotions. So instead of doing markdowns or value, they're leaning into celebrity partnerships and things like that. Not to harp on Shake Shack, but I spent like all morning listening to the call, so it's just on my mind. But they have an upcoming or I think it launched yesterday, their promotion to promote the movie Trolls. And so that's something that, the consumer doesn't get anything free out of it. You have to pay for the Trolls shake and things like that, but they're expecting a certain amount of traffic increases because a lot of their units are in the same shopping centers as movie theaters. So you're taking your kids to see the Trolls movie, you have to walk past the Shake Shack. There's a giant milkshake poster in the window with their favorite character, and there you have it. So that's a different kind of way that restaurants can lean into marketing without necessarily taking value. The other thought is that, as these things do these days rely so heavily on technology, that's why it's smart for brands such as Wingstop to be developing their own tech platforms. Now, of course, it was the McDonald's app that crashed back in the day, but Wingstop, I think I'm really, really interested to see them roll out their tech stack, which is going to go way beyond an app. It's like a whole thing. I don't know technology. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be talking about it, but I'm really interested to watch them roll it out, see what they do with it. And I have higher hopes and expectations for Wingstop's proprietary tech stack than I have for a lot of brands in the past.
I agree. I have a lot of hopes for them because they are this tech forward brand. They are in some cases considered more of a tech company than a restaurant company. We've seen a few of those kind of stories come out. Sweetgreen reports after market today, so another tech company that I haven't seen very high hopes from people recently. But I think I'm also excited to see Kava's numbers. I think that's like the big
Yeah.
mystery for me that I can't wait to see.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually kind of surprised that, speaking of, I was hoping we would talk about Wingstop because, obviously, as a tech reporter, I spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff. And I was kind of surprised that, for the most part, besides Wingstop, I feel like this week, not a lot of restaurants were talking during the crazy earnings season. Not a lot of brands were talking about technology. In fact, it came up in the Papa John's earnings call, and they just kind of breezed over it, saying, yeah, we'll invest more in our loyalty program, but didn't really go into detail. And so I think it's really impressive that they're launching a proprietary platform, a proprietary tech platform, and that they are, and one of the words they used is going to be personalization, which means data, and obviously that's huge. Digital personalization through data is the next big thing, or I guess the current big thing for restaurants to take control of and take advantage of, and to make the experience, again that word experience, even more and more hyper personalized for customers, so that they keep coming back, and so that you can inch up those traffic numbers. I am really really good at bringing that back around then.
So let's talk a little bit about McDonald's because, I mentioned they're the bellwether for the industry. Alicia Kelso's talked about it a bunch that McDonald's is it when you talk about restaurant brands and finances. Like that's the brand you always want to follow. And they said their chicken is going to be a huge business moving forward, which we've seen plenty in the fact that all these chains have been doing chicken wars. And it's not just chicken sandwiches, it's the chicken wars now. I mean, chicken is what we've seen from Gen Z, the most important item on the menu, and boneless chicken is it. And so I'm curious to know what you guys think about their budding chicken business, budding aka $1 billion. What you guys think about that and what McDonald's kind of means for the industry.
I'm not that surprised that chicken is doing so incredibly well for them. They're not the only brand that mentioned how well chicken is doing. Brinker also said how they're focused so much on their chicken crispers. And I just think that it has become it's so incredible because ever since the chicken wars began, at this point, was it 4 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever it was, it's just amazing how much it's not really so much a blip or a trend, but it's just become this massive business. Obviously chicken existed before 4 years ago and was on menus everywhere, but I just think that it had kind of taken a backseat to other proteins, like especially beef, burgers, etc. And so I'm just really not that surprised that McDonald's is leaning into this because they see where the industry has gone in terms of consumer preferences.
Yeah, it's fun to watch. It's kind of like you said, the wars started in 2019. I'm putting quotes around all of those. It doesn't really feel like the best language to use, but anyway. And it does kind of feel like there's just suddenly now a surge of various chicken news. Like there wasn't a specific, everybody can point to the day that Popeyes launched their chicken sandwich in 2019 as like a trigger point. There hasn't been one this year, but it's like all of a sudden you look around and you're like, well, McDonald's is leaning all the way into chicken. Taco Bell is testing chicken nuggets. Like, I mean, and even just like in general, I would say like one of the buzziest chains right now is Raising Cane's, which like, what do? Chicken exclusively. That's their whole thing. We have chicken and that's it. So it's just been fascinating to kind of see. It's almost like it happened all at once, but also like very slowly. Like all of a sudden I woke up today and I was like, oh, I can get a chicken nugget literally anywhere, including Taco Bell. Interesting.
Very
Um,
specific. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go
no,
ahead.
it's okay. The last thing I was just going to say is that I am hearing, well, okay, I'm listening to more earnings calls than I usually do this quarter, but I am hearing more chatter about specifically beef prices and beef inflation. So I do think that's obviously going to be a big piece of it is like, well, let's see, beef is really expensive right now, so let's just really push chicken. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think that the price of beef could definitely be impacting it. The trend actually that I'm seeing, not just the obviously the chicken sandwich is huge, as we said, but the specific menu item that I think is really big the past few months is actually boneless wings slash chicken nuggets because they are really the same thing. Sorry, I don't know if it's a controversial opinion, but it is. It's
Oh my
just like
God, Brett would
sausage
totally
chicken
agree
nuggets.
with you. Let's
Well,
our
there's
colleague
sausage
Brett
chicken
Thorne is
nuggets.
big on that.
But speaking of Brett, he actually wrote a trend piece on how boneless chicken is surging on menus. He talked about Brinker. He talked about uh, what else did he talk about? A few different brands that is just it's just really surging, and so I'm really not surprised at Taco Bell trying to be like, hey, we'll do the same thing. I haven't had the Taco Bell chicken nuggets yet, and I'm really curious. But I do think we could kind of put that all in the same kind of category because they're very similar.
I mean, Taco Bell did chicken wings, and they were very good wings.
Yeah,
And they sold out
surprising.
really quickly. So I have a feeling their nuggets are just gonna go gangbusters, just like KFC's nuggets did. KFC, you would imagine would have a nugget, but didn't for some reason, and then their nugget did gangbusters. And so I think it just shows that people really want boneless chicken, which is weird because I would have never thought the boneless chicken would have been like Gen Z's favorite thing. But for some reason, that's what they're asking for it. They want it, and they're getting it at every chain. So it's obviously a big market to go into. So do you guys have any last thoughts on earnings before I let you go?
No, I think that's a good note to end on.
I think so too.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me today, and everybody listen to our interview up ahead, which is a mashup. So I'll let you guys hear about it when it comes out. Okay. Thanks, guys, for joining me.
Thanks, Holly.
Texas Pete is taking its flavor on the road with convenient, easy to enjoy portion control packets. Whether it's a Texas Pete dip cup or sauce packet, your customers will be able to enjoy bold flavor for a better on-the-go dining experience. Anywhere, anytime. Ask your broker for the #1 portion control, hot sauce, or visit TexasPeteFoodService.com for more information.
Hi, this is Alicia Kelso. I am the executive editor at Nation's Restaurant News, and I am here live at Create the Experience in Palm Springs, California. And I am with Lauren Fernandez, who is the founder of Full Course. And she has a deep history in the restaurant industry. Lauren, thank you for coming. And I want you to sort of walk through your really impressive experience and into Full Course and what it is.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. It was great to be on stage. I just want to give you guys a shout out for having such an incredible, diverse lineup. I really appreciate that. Every time you open a door and put a woman on stage, a minority on stage, I just high five you. So, what I want to say about my career is it's been an interesting journey, and I'm an attorney by profession with an MBA, both from Emory. And my product development background started in about 2006. And so it took me on a path to pharma land where I worked for Novartis and launched a $2 billion product across the world. Pretty cool stuff. I was very young in my career, but very quickly figured out that that doesn't happen often. So I got one shot at that, and it was probably going to be another decade before it happened again. And I was trying to figure out what next? And I got a call from someone at Focus Brands who had gone to business school with me. And she was doing licensing at the time onto consumer packaged goods. So I went and I met with Russ Umfenhauer, the then CEO. The rest is history, so they say. I figured if I wanted to jump from pharma to food, Focus Brands was the place to do it. At the time, the talent in that room was exceptional. And we had a phenomenal time. I was there for a little over 3 years. And when I left, I was looking to grow professionally. And Russ, always a phenomenal mentor, said to me, you need operations experience because you're always going to get pigeonholed as a lawyer. And so I said, yes, sir. Where do I get that? And he said, silly, go buy a restaurant. And so I did. I, with some partners, formed Origin Development Group. We ended up being multi-unit franchisees of the Chicken Salad Chick system, which was a phenomenal journey to be that early in the brand and really have that experience of seeing Stacy grow the company, Stacy Brown, the founder of Chicken Salad Chick at that time, and watch that brand through its early evolution. It was really there. Our units were, I think, in sequence, like one of them was store number 6. I think the last one that we opened was store number 98 in their system.
Yeah.
So just being on that ride with them and having a front row seat and being the largest multi-unit franchisee in the system at that time just really gave me such an understanding of what it takes to grow and scale, not just from the franchisor side, but also from the franchisee side, and what it took for capital, right? Employee management, all the things, the development angle. And I started to develop this thesis that early stage restaurants need the firepower and the talent that we brought to the brands at Focus, but they needed them earlier. So things like understanding scale of product, how to manufacture to create efficiencies and scale, what kinds of development are appropriate early, why not non-traditional, right? And it was kind of gnawing at the back of me and eventually became the genesis of Full Course, which is where we are today.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I started Full Course. I actually incubated it in 2019 in stealth mode. We officially launched it in 2020. And we became very quickly focused on people and education. We really felt like that was an important place to start given everything that was going on with the pandemic. How can I teach, coach, and train all of these independent restaurateurs how to add product and get it out the door quickly? It was sort of where my head was at. But it became the really, like, I think the heart of the company, if you will, was this focus on people, closing the education gap and making sure that was always our focus. But of course, we invest in the space. And so we have a fund that we raise, or constantly raising capital to deploy in this space, particularly with a focus on brands that are culturally representative, owned by women, veterans, whatever. We really want to make sure we're leveling the playing field and everyone has an equal opportunity to access that capital. But we're also operators. We get in there and we work these brands with the founders and next to them as a minority partner. We don't take over their business. And we focus on developing for them, right? Like adding all those channels to the business that we are used to doing, those strategies from Focus, from other brands that we've worked for. So
Great. That is certainly a unique experience. And I think that's why so many people are just pouring into what you say here. We obviously, the impetus behind Create is to help educate these emerging operators. They want to know what you're saying, especially on that finance piece, because a lot of these folks, they start concepts, because they are foodies, and they have the service component. I've talked to several people who don't know how to read a P&L. Those are challenges. And securing finances, people get into the restaurant industry because they want to be on the food side. So walk me through some pieces of advice on how small concepts and emerging concepts can and maybe should secure financing, for that growth component.
I think the first thing to understand is that financing, or capital, let's call it, can come in many forms. And at its top level, it can be equity, where you give up points in the company. It can be debt, where you pay to borrow that money, just like a loan. Or it can be grants or gifts, right? Those are really 3 main categories. Within those categories, there are different vehicles or structures that give an early and emerging stage brand more control. I think the biggest danger to these emerging brands is that their lack of access to capital in the traditional formats, and I'm using air quotes here, like a bank, right, really hamper their ability to grow. And the business often may even fail because it's undercapitalized. And so having them understand, look, there are a million different ways that you can go and raise that capital. And in those earlier stages, it's probably safer to stick with debt as long as you can service the debt. And to give up equity early is usually highly problematic because you've got those people around your table now, potentially indefinitely. And once you give up a slice of equity, it's gone forever. You can't, in theory, resell that, right? And if you sell it at too low a price too early, you're in danger of not having that to A, maintain control of the company, B, sell at a price later that's higher, and C, with the wrong partners. I see a lot of C. I see a lot of people taking money from the wrong people too early. And I think if you can swing it, structured debt options, whether it's a friends and family raise or it's crowdsourcing that debt, there's some creative vehicles out there around your own assets that are fairly low risk. So like one example would be borrowing against your 401k or your whole life insurance policy, which most people don't understand, but that doesn't actually show up on your credit report. So I really want to encourage people to know the entire spectrum of capital options out there, to really evaluate them pretty continually on risk versus reward to them, and put together a blended strategy that really like gets them over those finish lines.
It intrigues me that you say you hear far too often that people have the wrong partners.
Oh, yeah.
How do you look for red flags there? I mean, you take them for a drink and then decide that you're not compatible, or?
Okay, so I will start with something my dad always said to me, which is know thyself. So I think this sounds a little counterintuitive, but it's actually really brilliant. You have to know your strengths and weaknesses. And if you are not real about that and you put someone around your table that thinks that they're helping you, but they're stepping over your strengths, I don't think that that's additive. If you can find value-add investors, fabulous, get them. And in those cases, I think some equity or some upside profit sharing is a great way to go. And again, people have to think creatively about this. Maybe you bring them to the table and it's a convertible debt note that switches to equity later. Maybe you bring them to the table and it's debt, but they have profit sharing at a certain level of participation. However, they don't actually have equity points in the company. There are so many shades of gray in the way you can structure this, and you just got to get creative. But I think being clear about who you are as a founder, being clear about what it is you need, will help you shift out of kind of taking the easy carrot that's in front of you. And I think a lot of people often just jump at that first offer, and it's not the right thing to do.
Sure. The macro environment, I'm tasked with writing about this, and it's the weirdest. I mean, I've been covering this industry for 12 years, and I don't know how to articulate what is happening now. The consumer seems strong still, and, we had some bank issues a couple months ago. And I mean, how do you manage that as an emerging operator? All of the disparate information and the disparate macro conditions that are happening. And where does the banking crisis, there's my air quotes, because it seemed real short-lived, but I don't know enough, obviously. How does that fit in? Where are we now?
I think that we, in recent history, a la 1919, have not really had a good example of what a global pandemic does to economies. Certainly not in first world economies, right, where we're sitting in the U.S. Now, that said, what has happened is many major banks pulled back on big lending deals because they didn't want to underwrite huge M&A transactions in our space, not knowing where the interest rates were going to land. And similarly, lots of private equities are just sitting on powder-kegged capital, waiting to do it because they don't want to write 100% equity checks where they're paying all cash for a deal. Most private equity groups are heavily leveraged when they do their deals, either before or part of the deal structure or after, right? It's just kind of how it works. Now, the reality is, pretty big deal just came down the pike with Subway. And as a veteran...
I heard about that.
You heard about that?
Yeah.
In my own backyard, nonetheless, it's Rourke Capital where, I used to work. And so, in theory, to me, I thought that was great because it kind of heralded, okay, M&A's loosening up. Here it comes. Expect a crescendo. Because here's what's going on. Many brands have deals out there packaged and ready to go, whether it's for financing, it's for some kind of partial liquidity event, it's for a full transaction, whatever. And those deals are sitting there waiting to be done. So I think we have started to see the beginnings of the bigger banks loosening up on their lending, getting comfortable that we are where we are. It's unlikely the interest rates are going to do too many more crazy things because we've got an election cycle coming up. We all know to read between the lines there. And I think what will happen is that lending loosening at the top will signal strength and confidence in the sector of restaurants generally, which will then trickle down to regional banks, which will then trickle down to state and community banks, right? And so I think that we will see emerging restaurateurs benefit from that, but certainly not for another 6 to 8 months.
Okay.
I think it's going to take us a minute to see the kind of effects of that play out. And I'm kind of basing that on the thesis that we're going to see some more M&A activity at the top.
Sure. I appreciate the optimism, and I think after what this industry has been through, 6 to 8 months doesn't seem like a long time.
Well, right, but people got to eat.
People got to eat.
And as an investor, let's go back and look from like '06 to '09. We were crying into our Wheaties over 3% comp growth year over year. And I remember sitting around the table at Focus and being like, that seems pretty good to me. And someone explaining to me like, no, that's just natural growth, like the population growing, people eating more, literally like that's flat. And I was like, oh, cool, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, no, not cool. I'm like, no, but that's better than most industries. And so to me, I've always loved banking on the fact that people have to eat. And I particularly love fast casual because it's in the middle. It's not QSR. When people have inflationary pressures on their wallet, they tend to stay in the lane of fast casual or trade down from finer dining. And we like it. I mean, most of the outlooks on that segment for the next 5 years have the growth year over year at an adjusted CAGR of 9 to 13%. As a segment. So I think that's reflecting consumer behavior generally, but also some macroeconomic pressures.
Oh, so you're bullish on fast casual.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That is my lane for investing. I love it.
What about casual? Because we've seen that space really fascinates me right now because we're seeing like Olive Garden just killing it right now, and then we're seeing a significant retrenchment in traffic elsewhere. Mm-hmm. You know, Texas Roadhouse is anomalous in general, but it just seems all over the map. So, what are your general opinions about how consumers are using the casual dining space, or is it brand by brand?
I do think it's a little bit brand by brand. I think that that's a fair way of putting it. However, I do think that we've reprogrammed about 20 years of consumer behavior in about 2.5 years of a pandemic.
Fair.
So suddenly, the service proposition is an all or nothing kind of thing, which is so fascinating to me. I think in the mind of a consumer, they're like, I'm either going to go pay for great service at a full service restaurant, and I'm going to ding you if you mess it up, or I'm going to accept that there's some hybrid of an iPad I'm going to have to order on, a QR code at a table, and I might get help if I, shout loud enough. And I'm not trying to be glib here, but rather just to say we had such a polarization of available labor and service that was available to customers that I think we reset expectations. And so now when you roll up into a casual dining environment, and they nail it on the service, you look like a rock star.
Sure.
And I'm here for that, right? So I think this polarization to the tablet era, the self-serve era, the limited labor model that everyone kind of had to adopt really changed the way consumers started thinking about service. And I would love for there to be an iteration of casual where you can choose the level of service. So let's say you walk up into a restaurant, you can self-serve all the way through and pay a little bit less, or you can walk in and get, some hybrid version of table service, paying an extra couple bucks. Like, man, just put the choice in the consumer's hands, Yep. That's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
Interesting. All right, final question. And I'm going to tie it up with something we talked about in the beginning when you were providing an overview about, full course. The diversity, women in food service, all that stuff is very important to me personally, to the team at NRN. And I just want to sort of understand why it is a priority for full course and the challenges that exist with, minority operators with, and why that has been something that you are focused on.
So many reasons. It took me a really long time to confront this problem and think of the right solution, which is really what full course is. And I remember sitting next to my husband in 2019, and I've told this story a couple times, but it was really a profound moment because he'd heard me complain about some of the things I'd experienced as a woman. He'd seen it. He understood it and always had a ton of empathy, but doesn't ever take excuses from me either. And we were sitting down and we were talking through the solutions, which eventually became the foundation for Full Course. And I said, I just don't know that I can do this without raising my own capital, like without being in control of how we deploy that capital, because private equity is notoriously white and male, as is most of finance. And I was really wary to trust that mission of making more seats at the table available to the underrepresented founder, women, minorities, immigrants, single parents, veterans, you name it, to just anyone. And I really felt like it had to be a complete solution. And I was struggling with that because that was a stretch for me. That was a big step outside of my comfort zone. And he looked at me and he said, if you don't do it, nobody will. And you mic drop, right? I was like, oh man, here we go. And so we started financially modeling the company, what it would look like to be investors. What did fair and equitable investment look like? Now, look, I really genuinely believe, as the daughter of an immigrant, I'm first generation Cuban American. I have always been in very male dominated industries. And I'm down with the fact that I have just worked 4 times harder for everything in my career. And I make no apologies for that. And I don't want a tiny violin either. And here's the thing. I recognize that hustle and I will bank it every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And statistically, if you look at minority owned businesses, they consistently outperform their white counterparts. You look at what happens on the finance side, they are half as likely to get funded by a bank, whether it's a fear of rejection or an outright bias. And let's face it, especially if you have immigrated to this country or even if you're first or second generation, you just don't have those deep networks. And there's nothing wrong with the people who do have them. Good for you. But there are so many of us out there, and we are representative of what this country is made of, what makes us amazing. I am so grateful to be an American. I'm grateful that I am in a place where I can have my voice. I'm grateful that we have entrepreneurial opportunity and that I can exercise my right to put my money and my effort behind something like Full Course. And to me, that's how we're going to make a difference. If you want to see this industry change in 5 to 7 years, start banking the people who represent this country.
Very good. I appreciate that. That's awesome. And that's why we have you here. And I'm glad that we have your voice here too. It's you've just been remarkable at this show and we appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
So, Sahil Rahman, it seems kind of like we were discussing this earlier before we got all hooked up and recorded that maybe Indian food is the future. And you have Rasa, which has what, 5 units now?
Yep, we just opened our 5th restaurant a couple months back.
And where is it?
We opened up in Rockville, Maryland, so we now have restaurants in DC, Maryland, and Virginia.
And why don't you tell our audience about Rasa?
Yeah, absolutely. So Rasa is an Indian fast casual restaurant brand that my business partner Rahul Vinod and I opened back in 2017. So our fathers are actually business partners. They've been working together for over 30 years. They opened their first restaurant back in 1991. And, Rahul and I came on the scene in 1990. So quite literally, since we could walk, we've been doing so inside of Indian restaurants. And the long and short of it is, as we were growing up, today Indian food and Indian culture has become quite sexy. There's a lot of people who are really, really excited to go to an Indian wedding, or there's a lot of different Indian spices that have gotten popular, whether that's turmeric or so on and so forth. And even culturally, things like yoga and meditation and astrology, many things that have come from the East are now rising in popularity.
And Bollywood.
Oh,
which
yeah.
we didn't care about before, and now we do.
Absolutely. And so when we were kids, opposed to today where being Indian's quite cool, it was, you'd get picked on big time, right? I'd eat turkey sandwiches in school. You'd get things like, oh, it's the Indiana Jones with the monkey brains, or, you'd have the thank you come again and all of that kind of stuff. And so for us, we always dreamt about taking the food and the flavors that we grew up loving from our family's restaurants and bringing those to people in a more accessible way. And thus, Rasa was born.
And so what's the menu like?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way it works is we've tried to take the fine dining Indian flavors and bring it into a much more fast casual, accessible format. So there's two different ways you can experience it. You can go with one of our set bowls. So we've got 7 or 8 set bowls that you can choose from. These are our chef's favorites. If you're not as familiar with Indian food or you're a little nervous to try something new, this is a great way to get acclimated. And if if you love Indian food or you're a seasoned fast casual vet, you start with picking a base. So we've got things like South Indian rice noodles, lemon turmeric rice, super grains, and basmati. And then from there, you pick a main. We've got a bunch of veg and non-veg options. So things like sweet potato tikis. We've got a tofu and cauliflower. We also have turmeric ginger shrimp, lamb kebab, so on and so forth. And then from there, you pick a sauce. We've got 4 different sauces, all different heat profiles. You pick a fresh veggie, things like green beans, eggplant, so on like that. And then you finish it off with toppings and chutneys, which are kind of like Indian condiments. And so the idea is that you can get a really high quality Indian meal at a really affordable price point quickly in a fun and playful setting.
So how did you decide because India is big and there are a lot of different flavors. So how did you decide what were going to be the core products of your menu?
Totally. And you're absolutely right. And it's so interesting in that I like to say it's the most diverse country on the planet. And by that, obviously everyone's brown, but there's 400 different languages that are spoken, right? And so if you're dropped anywhere in India and you go 100 kilometers north, south, east, west, the food that people eat, the clothes they wear, the language they speak, the way they engage is just completely different. And so for us, to answer that question, we started thinking about what was true for the two of us. So both Rahul and I's moms are Punjabi and Northern, right? And Rahul's father, who's Chef Vinod, who's really been instrumental in helping us craft the menu, he is from Kerala in the south. So we primarily pulled ingredients, recipes, dishes, and styles from northern India as well as the south. And a lot of Indian restaurants in the U.S. primarily feature northern Indian or certain southern recipes like dosa and so on. And what we've really tried to do is bring the best of both together under one roof.
Did you try to do that in a way that they all go together well? Because this can be a challenge of non-Chipotle fast casual food, that you have different flavors, and sometimes when you put them together, you have chaos.
You are absolutely correct. So before we opened, we spent so much time going through the menu item by item by item. And there's certain things which we absolutely love and think are so delicious, and recognize that if someone's not well seasoned with Indian cuisine or well versed with it, that if you add that dish in, it's not gonna go well with some of the other items. So it was a pretty extensive process of actually figuring out not only what tastes delicious, but how do you make it in a way that people can't really mess it up too much. And some of that, of course, is the team and teaching the team and training and so on and so forth. But the other part of it is really thinking about what ingredients pair well together.
I would imagine most of your staff do not have Indian backgrounds.
You imagine correctly.
So that has to be an interesting training process to really get them into it and embrace it. And it's probably not hard for them to like it because it's delicious, but educating them so that they can educate others is probably hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started Rasa, something we talked a lot about and we still talk about today is how food is the gateway to culture, right? It's a lot easier to get a $10 bowl at Rasa than it is to buy a $1,000 plane ticket to India. And so we have thought a lot about how might we use our brand, our food, our physical space as a way to introduce people to a new cuisine and a new culture. And for us, that actually starts with our teams. And when we bring people in, we go through each different menu item. Sometimes we'll have Indian guests that we very consciously crafted the names of our menu in a way that doesn't intimidate people, right? So instead of calling it saag, we'll call it spinach. Instead of calling it bangan, we'll call it eggplant, right? We'll maintain that flavor that's authentic, but we've made it in a way where it's not as scary for someone who's new to the culture and cuisine. And so even with our team, we have to sometimes train we have lentil chips, for example. Indians will call that papadum. And so we have to train our team, okay, if someone says papadum, this is what they mean. This is that dish, things like that.
Oh, yeah, that's important because otherwise you alienate your alien guests when they're like, your Indian guests, and they're like, the person working here doesn't know this food.
Exactly. So I view it as a really fun opportunity to open people's minds. And we even have some team members who now are cooking Indian food, Latino team members who are cooking Indian food for their families, and they're eager to learn. And, we just hired a chief operating officer, and he's been pouring through books on India and watching documentaries on Netflix and things like that. So it's really exciting to be able to execute on that mission of opening people's minds to new cultures and new ideas right there inside of our own four walls.
Does it take very long to train your customers about how to engage with a rasa?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a complex answer. It's a yes and it really depends on who the customer is. I mean, we have everyone from 5-year-olds to 80-year-old Indian grandmothers. And so inside of that, the core fast casual customer, generally speaking, is comfortable with this model. There's a lot of brands that have pioneered this service format and made it mainstream, whether that's Chipotle or Kava or Sweetgreen, so on and so forth. So there is a general awareness of how the system works. Where we have more of an education hurdle is around a couple facets. One is educating people that Indian food is not all spicy. It's not greasy and oily like some lunch buffets they've maybe visited in the past are. And then actually helping people understand, okay, what is tamarind, right? Like, what does that taste like? What is kokum? What are some of these ingredients that are new that people haven't tasted before? And so it's an answer that really depends based on who the guest is.
Well, and you're all in the DC area, and that is an area that's had good Indian food for a long time, actually. But of course, that doesn't mean that your customers have had it just because it's available. There's also great Ethiopian food in India that some people like, and others have never had it.
Totally, and it's so interesting, especially as we've moved out more into the suburbs. We've opened in Fairfax, Virginia, and Rockville, Maryland, and inside of that, we're seeing a lot of people our parents' age who have grown up eating Indian food, loving Indian food, of the culture, who are coming in and they're just so overjoyed. And they're almost shook of, oh my gosh, this is our culture shared in this way. We have the opportunity to pick and choose. We've always wondered when would this arrive? And now it's here.
Well, and those of us who are food writing trend watcher types have been waiting for Indian food to sort of cross over into the mainstream for a long time. And since I started in this job 24 years ago, people have been saying Indian food's going to be the next one.
Right.
And then Korean came along, and so many others sort of leapfrogged over that. And now the last 3 restaurants I went to in New York City were Indian, and sort of high profile, cool, fun Indian restaurants.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now corporate companies that used to only have events in like steakhouses are having them in Indian restaurants. So do you think finally Indian food's time has come in the United States?
Yeah, I do. I really do. And it feels like we're on the tipping point in this moment. I mean, you look at a brand even like a Velvet Taco, they've got chicken tikka tacos. And you start to see the grocery store and the way that the aisle in the grocery store continues to expand year over year over year. And when we look at it, we feel as though Indian culture has made such massive inroads into the United States, from film, from music. I mean, if you look at corporate America, the CEO of PepsiCo, of Starbucks, of Microsoft, you name it, there are so many Indian leaders, and our culture's had so much more influence of late. And the one area that has just been catching up to that has been the food. There's still to date no regional or national brand that has really become a household name in Indian cuisine. And so as we look at it, we feel that today the consumer is not only open to Indian food, but they love it and they're looking for more options. And we're excited to be a part of that movement.
That's exciting. And some of the maybe older trendy Asian flavors and cuisines like Korean and Thai do not have national, or Vietnamese don't have a sort of a single national champion. So much runway for you guys.
Yeah, we believe so too. I think it's such an exciting moment. I mean, it feels like our food is finally ready to arrive in this country and make a big impact. And we're honored to be able to do so.
What does it feel like to be cool instead of like not cool?
Oh, I was just talking to someone about this yesterday. When we were kids, it was like the opposite of cool. People were making funny accents to you, and girls wouldn't talk to you because you were Indian or whatever that might be. And today, it's almost like everyone's trying to go to an Indian wedding, and it's been really fascinating to witness a culture go from a perceived negative to such a dramatically perceived positive. And it feels good. It's really grateful that our country, at least in some parts of it, is really choosing to open its mind to embrace new possibilities.
Why do you think that happened? Is it like movies like Bend It Like Beckham, which is a quite old movie?
It's a
and
great
stuff like
movie.
that? I love it. So good. And there's a lot of food in it.
Yes. So I think it's a multitude of factors. I mean, we were talking about it earlier. Yoga's roots in the country. India as a country as a whole is now having a moment. It was often, I know we don't use this term anymore, but it was often viewed as like a third world country, right? Like you had that Indiana Jones movie where they've got monkey brains on the plate. And today you're now having President Biden greeting the Indian Prime Minister for official state dinner. And I think it's a reflection of India's rising status as a country globally. And that's been mirrored by the rise of Indians in American culture.
Oh, it's funny. I actually have been to an Indian wedding in India.
Okay.
Or it was a half Indian.
Did you break out some of those salsa moves?
I did not. There weren't a lot of dancing. Wasn't a lot of dancing at this one. So my Anglo-Icelandic Canadian friend married a high caste Tamil Brahmin, an Iyer, but it was in Bangalore. And so I was there for breakfast, and there were obviously the banana leaves, and they're ladling out all the food, and we're eating with our hands, which is harder than people realize. Like it drips down your arm if you don't know how to do it right.
I'll teach you.
Thank you. I've practiced it a bit with different Indian cuisines, West African, whatever. But I was sitting next to an Indian guy, and I said, "What is this that I'm eating?" He said, "I don't know. I'm from Calcutta." So, just totally different part of the country.
Totally. And the last thing I wanted to add on that previous question was that we're also just standing on the shoulders of a lot of really brave and bold immigrants like our parents who chose to show up in this in this country with not much in their pockets and worked their butts off to figure out how do we make a life, how do we make a name for ourselves. And so, in our story, we're only able to be here because of all of the work that our fathers have done, not only practically in raising and supporting us, but also from a culinary and cuisine and industry standpoint. They were the real pioneers. Their generation of restaurateurs, they were the ones that were opening back in the day when landlords were saying, "Hey, we don't want your smelly food in our spots," right? They were the ones that were really slogging the long hours and doing the real hard work of opening people's minds. And so what we're doing is kind of standing on their shoulders in a continuation of that good work.
That's beautiful. And a lovely way to end our conversation. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, Sahil. And I hope to see you around more.
Absolutely.
Thanks.